So, hello, I'm Steven.
And I'm Beth.
And tonight we're talking about Rioja.
So this is one of the regions that comes to mind when you think about Spain, and we're so excited tonight to be drinking a Gran Reserva Rioja with everybody here, and we're going to dive into a couple different topics about Spain, and we're really excited to share that. It's a cold winter's day here, and this is a great wine to warm you up.
Yeah, the schools have been closed for like the past 2 days around here, and a 2009 Gran Reserva is really the only way to celebrate that. That's for sure. You know, every time I find a Gran Reserva, I pick it up because the price always seems to be a little bit on the lower side for how much goes into this wine, and it drinks so well right out of the bottle. And I think we hop right into today's event by talking about, decanting, right? We have our little decanter right here of the wine. And what does it mean between if you have like a fresh or a young vintage decanting wine versus a vintage 2009 Grand Reserva? And I'm gonna take control of the virtual event this evening to kind of talk about, when we have a younger wine, we want to decant in order to artificiate the aging, right? We want to get more oxygen into that wine, right? It helps this like phenolic development really quickly, right? We let it sit for sometimes 2 to 3 hours. Sometimes people like do this double decanting overnight, right? And really what we're doing is we're just trying to speed up that aging process, right? When we have a 2009 Grand Reserva, that is not what we're looking for. When we decant, we're looking to separate sediment, right? So tannin in red wine is a polymer. And as that polymer ages, it gobbles up all of the oxygen, sulfur, and nitrogen that exists within the bottle. And the polymer chains get longer, and then they actually fall out of the wine. And when they fall out of the wine, we don't necessarily want to be drinking that.
Though it won't hurt you.
It won't hurt you, of course. And so what you'll do is you decant, right, by slowly pouring. So you actually will pop the cork. And if you were like shaking it up and stuff like that, depending on how you were storing the wine, you can pop the cork and actually let it sit upside down. Again, allowing that sediment to fall to the bottom.
Let gravity do the job.
Exactly. And then when you pour, that's why there's this shoulder on the bottle here, is that you pour until you get the sediment sitting there. And then you pretty much slow down and you go even slower at that point. In the picture that we have here, you can put a light and you can actually see this sediment start flowing from the bottle into the decanter. What we like to do, though, is just stop well before any sediment goes into the decanter, and then that becomes Beth wine, and then I get to drink the rest of the sediment-rich wine. But that's just how we do it in this household, and you guys can feel however you'd like to do it in your own. And with that, that's kind of the long and short of decanting. So when you have a fresher wine, we want to be infusing oxygen, artificiating that aging, and with vintage wine, we're really looking to just separate out the sediment. We don't need to artificiate the aging because we already did that in bottle. Our phenolic development has already...
There's nothing artificial about that aging.
That's right. And so you actually want to decant a younger wine longer, and a vintage wine you really could open and enjoy right out of the bottle. All right.
Thanks, Steven. So hopefully everyone has some wine in their glass, and we can dive into Spanish wine. So before we focus in on Rioja, we want to give a brief overview of Spain. So here's our little plane. We're flying in. Where are we landing?
Well, we're going to be landing tonight we're landing in Rioja. But of course, we would be really flying into Madrid or Barcelona. Those, I think, are the two closest major airports coming from the East Coast.
Very nice. We'll have to try that sometime.
Sometime soon.
Well, so Spain is third among wine-producing countries in Europe. So we're talking, France, Italy, and Spain. So what's the deal with Spain? Spain is a country of tradition. So when I talk about that, I'm saying that one reason I say that is because the grapes that grow there are indigenous grapes. They really like to focus on indigenous grapes. So Mencia, Godello, Verdejo, Tempranillo, which we're going to be talking about a lot tonight. And that's instead of the more global varieties that you see, Cabernet Sauvignon, Chardonnay. They're going to be everywhere. And they are going to be in Spain, of course, but they really take pride in their indigenous grapes, and it's been a wine growing region since before the Romans. So it's been doing that a long time. The other thing that is part of their tradition is long aging in barrels. And we're going to talk a lot about barrel aging in this presentation, relatively speaking, compared to others. But that long barrel aging gives Spanish wines a very distinctive character. And another thing that is interesting that I didn't know until I started studying wine, because I've never been to Spain. You often, if you've never been and you don't know better, think of it as a very hot desert kind of place. And there are a lot of very infertile lands, but it's actually interesting. It's at elevation. Much of the vineyards are at elevation. And it turns out, this is one of my favorite facts, Spain is the second most mountainous country in Europe after Switzerland. So while it's much further south than many of the vineyards in France, like we were just in Champagne, it's much farther south than that. Because we're at elevation, you're still getting a lot of the benefits of cool climate because of those large diurnals at night. And that also allows the Spanish wine to have a really, really beautiful both power and elegance.
That's awesome. And that is wine production regions, right? Of the mountainous varietal. Aren't there like little like Andorra that exists literally in the mountains as well? I don't know. Anyway.
Well, maybe by acreage.
With acreage in wine production, right?
Most mountainous. But so there are a variety of regions producing wine here. This is just to give you an idea of acres under vine. And you can tell here that there's one region that's really going far above the others, and that's La Mancha. And that's actually where a lot of Aren, which is a white grape, is grown. And that's actually the most planted grape in Spain. It makes a crisp white wine. Maybe you could think of it analogous to Pinot Grigio in Italy. Nothing super complex. It's not necessarily what Spanish wine is known for, but it's good to have a crisp white wine.
Of course.
You know? But the top varietals have a lot more character, and the most prized of those varietals is Tempranillo, and that's going to be growing in Rioja and a few of the other regions, and that's making a red wine.
Awesome.
So zeroing in on Rioja, there's three major zones that it's good to be aware of. Rioja Alta, Rioja Alavesa, and Rioja Oriental, which previously was known as Rioja Baja, but has been changed since the classification got updated in 2018. So you might see it written a different way sometimes. Rioja gets its name from the Rio Oja, the river Oja, which was a destination for a lot of pilgrims doing this religious walk that I'm not super familiar with, but might make sense to some of those of you in the audience. So it became known for that place where the Rio Oja feeds into the Ebro River. That's the main river running through the region. It's considered probably the greatest wine region in Spain from the global perspective.
Yeah.
I mean, that can always be debated, but it's on a plateau, so we're talking about an elevation of about 1,500 feet. And what's really cool about this region is it's isolated from the Atlantic influence by the Cantabrian Mountains. So it's actually not a maritime climate, even though without the mountains you would have thought it would be. So it's going to act more like a continental climate. And once you get down into Rioja Oriental, it's actually going to be getting the Mediterranean influence. You're going to get more of a Mediterranean climate. So think of Rioja Alta and Alavesa as cooler, so you're going to get more acidity. And think of Rioja Oriental as warmer, so you're going to have higher alcohol and a more Mediterranean influence there. The last thing I wanted to... Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was going to say, like, when we were drinking this wine, Beth made the comment that was like, this is only a 13.5%. Even though it has a lot of tannin, a lot of structure, it has that high acid that's, even at a 2009, that acid's still persistent. It was nice that there isn't that high 15, 16% ABV, and that's really coming from that high elevation.
Yeah, it's making it both powerful and structured, but also elegant wine, which is really, really cool. The last thing I want to point out on the slide is, as of the most recent reclassification, it's now been permitted to include sort of village level and if there's a specific single vineyard on the bottle. So they're moving towards more of a model that you might be familiar with in France with Burgundy. And that's really exciting because it's allowing the winemakers to communicate to the consumer that more specific sub-region, which might have its own distinct character. So that's pretty exciting, something you can look out for.
Yeah, and I mean, as we always like to try to highlight, that indication of source of goods for the consumer, right? That is the fundamentals of trademark. And, when a band of farmers and producers get together and they're like, hey, let's make a better product, let's try to put our name behind it, and let's try to have some type of typicity with the wines that we're creating. I applaud that personally, because as a consumer, we go to a wine shop and I don't know anything, right? A lot of people label hunt, right? That's a cool looking label. And that sounds fun, but if you know the story of the village, it could be really nice.
Yeah, you might find that you really are drawn to the flavor profile and structure profile of a particular village, and you want to buy more of that. So that's kind of fun. Another thing that's interesting about this region is it previously was a bit like Champagne, where producers would buy grapes from all over, but now it's trending more towards the winemakers and that facility. They own the land and the grapes as well, so it makes sense that they would want to explore that site specificity more, whereas previously it was that big house Champagne model where they were buying grapes from all over and blending.
Wonderful.
Okay, so this is a little bit of a breakdown of what kind of varietals are permitted in Rioja. So Tempranillo is going to be the majority grape, but you can also have Grenache, which is known as Grenache in France, Mazuelo, which is Carignan, and Graciano. And so that's going into the reds, the rosés, and the sparkling. They also do, and so, before I go onto the whites, I did want to mention there's sort of two major styles that you want to be aware of. So there's a modern style and a traditional style. The traditional style, think long aging in the barrels, think powerful structure, think dark and earthy, but the more modern style, they're going for a more elegant note, maybe more akin to a Pinot Noir like expression. It's still going to have that earthiness, though. You can't get rid of that. That's a distinctive thing about Tempranillo from this region. But so even in the red category, there's going to be two styles. They're not official, but they're known. And
and for anybody who's sitting there thinking, wait, I think you guys have talked about this before, but it was in another region. It is also going on in Italy as well, right, with our Nebbiolo, right? Our Nebbiolo grape is very analogous in this story thread.
Absolutely. So there is a rosé and a sparkling, which I'd love to try the sparkling. Haven't tried one yet, but
That's
I'm
true.
all about it. They do make white wine. A lot of it is maybe not quite as exciting as getting into the reds, but there is one white wine that if you see, it's kind of a wild ride if you're willing to try it. And that's a traditional white Rioja. So that's going to be an oxidized style, and it's going to have like resiny, waxy notes. It's going to be honeyed. It's super cool. We've tried one or two. Really interesting. Very distinctive. Not to everyone's taste, but a cool experience. So that's something else to keep an eye out for.
All right. So we're going to get into some winemaking here. How do you make a red wine in Rioja?
Well, this is really just how you make a red wine in general. We wanted to go over that real quick.
Well, we did talk about, with champagne and sparkling wine, that we have to start with a base wine, which I think is a really great way to just kick off a wine series where we're starting about, there's a base wine, and then we're going to make it sparkling. Well, how do you make a base wine, Beth?
So you grow some grapes and you harvest them. One of the fun things about Tempranillo is the word Tempranillo actually, it comes from... I wrote this down because I didn't want to get it wrong. But I've lost it.
Oh, no. She's a lot of notes.
Well, it comes from the Spanish word for early. So it's an early to harvest grape. So you're going to be harvesting early your Tempranillo compared to other grapes. Then you're going to go through your alcoholic fermentation in tanks, most likely, as depicted here. You have an option to do some pressing. You could do punch down. You could do all kinds of things. But you're going to take that juice and then you're going to be putting it into the aging process, if that's what you're into. So in Rioja, we're talking about primarily oak, which in oak barrels, which we mentioned, we're gonna talk about that. But there's also other options, and some of the more modern winemakers there are exploring some of the others, like concrete and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So then you have the option to do malolactic conversion or stop malolactic conversion. And then then after that, you're going into your racking. If you're doing any filtration, you're putting it in bottle and you're storing it. And we'll get into the fact that Rioja not only has age requirements in barrel, but it also has age requirements in bottle. So
yeah, and so one of the things that's interesting to talk about with all of these process steps, right, from the giant fermentation tanks, getting into the specific aging vessel, and then moving it through the warehouse, is that one of the efforts through sustainability and organic farming that we see is trying to use gravity, right? Where we'll see the fermentation tanks, which are the heaviest parts of this whole process, at the highest part of the manufacturing facility. And then they don't use pumps, right? And they believe that it doesn't break down the wine as much, right? Because you're not pumping the wine at a excess force. You're just allowing gravity to go. So it's a more sustainable once it's set up, and it's also doesn't influence the wine with harsh pressures. So, as we start to think about whenever you hear like, what is it, like zero gravity or like gravity in the in wine production, this is what they're talking about, not using pumps to go between these.
Yeah, I mean, these are some like, think about if you're processing your most precious grapes from your most precious vineyard. The idea of running it through a bunch of pumps doesn't sound super great.
Right.
If you can avoid it, that would be great.
And it was great that you made the comment about Champagne, because we also see this big drive right now in Rioja to really be even more sustainable, and that whole idea of like organic and like a clean farm. Like, these are all family vineyards that are in Rioja. Like, the idea of using pesticides and herbicides would probably make their not sit well with them.
No.
So they just don't naturally gravitate towards doing those practices anyways. But anyways, that's just kind of something that I just want to throw in there, that they already were sustainable and organic for the most part, and now they're really focused on that even more.
Yeah, absolutely. So within Rioja red wine, we mentioned there's some requirements about aging in barrel and aging in bottle, and this is going to be reflected in these labels here. So we have generic, meaning no age requirements, so this is going to be very young wine. But then Crianza, Reserva, and Gran Reserva are the ones you're going to see the most. You want to look those little symbols in the pyramid. You'll actually see that if you have the bottle that we have. You can look on the back and you'll see the navy blue for the Gran Reserva. So being categorized by how long they aged, I guess we could start with Crianza, which roughly means raised or nursed. That's going to be your easy drinking wine. That's your easy drinking wine. Still sees 2 years of aging with 1 in oak. Then you move on to the Reserva. This is going to be more concentrated. There's going to be more subtleness. The wine's going to be more supple. Talking about 3 years aging minimum, and this is all minimum, and 1 in oak. And then at the very top of the pyramid, we have our Gran Reserva. So this is only about 1 to 10% of wines in Rioja are going to qualify as the Gran Reserva. This is your most elegant, your most silky and refined wine. This is 5 years minimum aging, 2 years minimum oak. But by no means do people have to stop there, and many producers do go longer.
And when we talk about aging wines for this long, like, we do lose wine to evaporation. So over the course of those 5 years, the wine producer has lost a lot of the production of wine. So at the very beginning, when I was saying, like, when you see a Gran Reserva, oftentimes it's a steal. It may still be in the $30 to $40 price point range, but when you compare how much time and new oak went into this,
and real estate. I mean, you have to keep the barrels somewhere. They take up space that you have to be monitoring.
It's impressive. So it's really great. I'm glad that this was a very special bottle. I'm very happy to be where I am right now. So when we're talking about, like, it's the best of the best wines, what does that even mean, right? What does it mean to have the best berries going into this specific wine, a Gran Reserva versus a Crianza? And so some of the considerations that a winemaker will do is when the harvest comes in, right? So they can monitor the sugar level. There's a Brix metrics that they can do. So they can know what those grapes are coming in. They can also measure like the acidity, the pH levels. And then there's also this idea that they can, measure the tannin ripeness and flavor development. What I think is interesting is when we talk about producers that have 4 or 5 generations, right? The kids that are now adults producing the wines grew up in this, right? Like they could probably just look at the field and see what's being produced and have a sense of if there's going to be a lot of Gran Reserva that should be produced from this vintage or not. Just by even looking at it. Like, yes, of course, we have all these measurements and everything else to verify it, but I don't think that you can really replace just experience that you gain over the course of your whole lifetime. And then the last factors really hone in on that, right? Like the skin thickness and color, right? That's a sense of feel and touch. The overall health of the grapes, like have they been diseased or are they overall healthy? And then the uniformity of clusters, right?
Do they look good?
Do they look good, right? But I don't know what a good cluster versus not a good cluster would look like, right? If you have full variation versus not, right? And like these types of ideas are something that you need to grow up with. So when we talk about like these families that have long histories of growing grapes and making wine, this is why it's sometimes important because they grew up in it, and then just their sense of it's a good year or not is important and valuable.
And it's only going to be in the best years that you would put something away for so long to create that Gran Reserva wine, because it's not going to make sense to put if it's not a great year, if the grapes aren't doing as well, because putting that much effort into the winemaking, it's not going to pay off as much.
Right.
And for some pretty pictures, so we're not just boring you with text. So here's the Ebro River. Here's an image. You can see some vineyards there as well. And you can see how there's mountains in the back protecting the area. Yeah.
That cloud formation on the mountains is very interesting as well. Mm-hmm.
And then here's just another image to give you a sense of place. So this is another village in Rioja, and just it's beautiful. Look at those grapes. Yeah. This last image that we have is some old vines. So in Rioja, many of the vineyards are going to have vines that are 40 years or older. And old vines is a relative term, but once the vines get really gnarly like this and they're old vines, they're going to be producing less and more concentrated berries. And the wine made from those berries is going to be more complex. So it's very valuable. At some point, they might be producing so little it's not possible to keep them, but they'll let them go a really long time in Spain. And the other thing you can see here is the vines are planted quite far apart from each other. This is more common in Spain than other regions that we often talk about, and that's because the land is like so arid and infertile that you can't plant them too close together or they won't make it. So that's another reason why I forgot to mention this in the beginning, but now I can segue into it. The land under vines in Spain is greater than France and Italy. Merely because they're planted so far apart. So there's not necessarily making more wine, but there's more land planted with vines because they have to keep them far apart like this.
Yeah, I just imagine when they, the field managers in Spain are hearing about like people that are seeking, this organic classification by not using herbicides and pesticides, and they're just like, what are you talking about? You have plants that grow around your vines? You have insects that want to live here? No, I'm sure they have their own problems, of course, but like as you can see from the picture here, it's a pretty arid environment.
A lot of it can be, yeah. So
yeah.
Yeah. All right. So
moving on to barrels.
Barrel time.
Barrel time. That's what we all came here for this evening. You didn't know that's what you came here for, but that's what we're going to give you.
Can't talk about Rioja without talking about barrels. So, why would we put wine in oak? What is the reason that you would put grape juice in oak? Okay, so you want to. What happens when you put the wine and the oak together is both have flavors. And when the flavors combine, you create this whole new experience. And so that's imparting different compounds. Another reason is it allows you to oxygenate the wine at a controlled rate. Okay, because the barrels are the coopers create this amazing product that's just like real. Like the wood is already very dense, and then everything's really tight together. So it's very controlled oxygenation. Okay, and then the last one is it can create an environment for malolactic fermentation. So that's something the winemaker might desire. So I have a few compounds that can be imparted by the oak for the chemistry nerds in the audience.
I love it.
So, and I'll probably say these completely wrong, and if you're familiar with any of these, I apologize. Furfural will give a dried fruit, burned almond, and or burnt sugar.
Okay, furfural.
Guaiacol will give a burnt characteristic.
Okay.
Oak lactone will give a woody, dill, or coconut aspect. Eugenol equals spices, cloves, smoke. Vanillin, more familiar with that
vanilla?
one.
Is
vanilla.
that? Yeah, nice.
And,
I got that one.
Syringaldehyde also gives a vanilla-like thing. So there's all these cool compounds floating around now because you expose the wine with the oak, and these are going to give your wine a new, a new profile.
Awesome. Yeah. All right. Well, our resident chemist over here, and I'm a wannabe historian, evidently through wine. So I'm going to kick it back a little bit and talk about how do we even have barrels that we store wine in. And we first see barrels coming on the scene around the ancient Egyptians. There's no one inventor of the wine barrel, but it was actually the Celtics that were kind of given this idea that they created the first cooperage, right? They used steel to wrap the wood, and because they were making the boats that they had, they were able to bend wood in a way that allowed this barrel making to happen. And what they realized was that they could create barrels that were watertight because they were building boats, and then they're like, well, we want to store food.
You could keep water out, but you could also keep things in.
Right. And for the most part, it was actually at the very beginning more about like flour being dry at sea and shipping things. And so what I think is really fascinating was I dove into. I also love whiskey as well, and there's like this whole charred aspect to things. And when winemakers are buying barrels, they select their char style,
toastiness.
So the toastiness. So where did that even come from? And what they realized was that you do char the inside of the barrel in order to allow the staves to bend, and there's going to be a variability, especially back then in manufacturing, between some people over charring or under charring. And people did transport wine and beer. Now we got to realize that people didn't have a discerning palate back in this era of time. But they did notice, like, hey, this beer has more flavor than this beer, and what happened? And then they can kind of go back through time and say, like, well, maybe this extra charring imparted more flavors. And just through happenstance of variability in the manufacturing process of creating barrels, they were able to discern that, hey, we can make different tastes based off of different char levels because of the way that they were produced. Now, that's the elegant, beautiful story of how people stumbled upon charring. The maybe less elegant theory is that they also used barrels, oak barrels, to transport fish. And then if you wanted to transport wine or beer after transporting fish, then you just char the heck out of it on the inside and just hope that all the fish smell and guts are gone. And then you put beer in it, and then you ship it that way. And so really there's conflicting stories about how we get this evolution of barrels and charring, but it's really the Celtics that started it, and the Spanish that really took it and made it their own. It was really important with the Spanish Armada being able to transport flour and gunpowder on boats, and ever since then they've always had this love of barrels. So,
Pretty cool.
there you go, history and chemistry for you. All right, moving on.
Well, haven't left the barrels behind quite
Oh,
yet.
we're not leaving barrels yet. All right,
no.
we're back
Oh,
to
no.
barrels.
No.
Oh no. Oh, I see what you're
This
saying.
is also a barrel slide. So,
Barrels all day.
one of the interesting things about the barrels used in Rioja in Spain is they use predominantly American oak. And this is different from other regions, including the United States, which continues to use French oak. So I was interested to learn that a lot of the wood is coming from Missouri and Pennsylvania. And American oak is particularly known for imparting dill, coconut, and vanilla. So a lot of times with Rioja, you'll notice kind of like a dill note, whereas French oak is going to do different things, and you just don't see American oak being used too many other places. I did want to, I'm curious still why more American producers aren't playing with American oak, but that's where we are.
That's where we are. Ah, good to know. I'd love to go see an oak forest for the purposes of making barrels, for the woods for the barrels. I think that sounds fun.
That'd be pretty great. Okay, well, so finally we are here at the bottle that if you purchased the package, we are looking at this. The wine in this bottle came primarily from Rioja Alta, which, if you remember, I mentioned being a little bit cooler, so we're talking higher acidity. And this is 80% Tempranillo, 15% Mazuela, and 5% Graciano. And so majority Tempranillo. A Gran Reserva Tempranillo like this frequently will have really beautiful notes of black cherry, cigar box, brown sugar, dill, and they can cellar for more time. I mean, we opened it and we're excited to drink it with you, but it could keep going.
Yeah. And I think right out of the bottle, we did decant it immediately, and then it just hits your nose with this beautiful, beautiful bouquet.
Yeah. And it has opened up
quite a bit. I'm glad that we see some the Mazuela and Graciano on here, because earlier when you listed all the grapes, it was just like, wait, when did one word stop and the other one begin? We should, but if you're interested in all the grapes and stuff like that, I think we just have to go over there and try them. I think that's really the only way to do it. So yeah.
I hope that you're enjoying, and I hope that you learned a little bit new in this presentation. So I think we'll go ahead and.
It's a great, last time we were talking about wines that you order while you're out. And Gran Reserva, Rioja can be a great purchase if you're looking for an alternative to a Cabernet Sauvignon. It's going to have that tannin structure. With this having so much age on it, we aren't looking for just a piece of meat with salt on it or like a slight berry. We're looking for more of those like cooked or stewed types of meats.
It can go really well with chorizos or mushrooms as well, trying to get into that earthiness.
Earthy notes, yeah. And so I think it's a good alternative, especially depending on what restaurant you're at, because they may have somebody who's a real wine buff who loves Gran Reserva as much as we do, and then nobody's ordering it. So it might be priced pretty great because it's not on really that many people's radar. And so if you're out, if you find about it, feel free to share about it on the blogs. We love following people in their wine adventure. And so, with that, I think that we should sign off, at least on the recorded portion, and say, look forward to seeing you next month, where it's Valentine's Day.
Yes, and we will be broadcasting on Valentine's Day, and we will be going to Italy. Sparkling wine on Valentine's Day. I don't have to, book reservations. It's pink, of course.
Yeah, and that's the important part. It's pink, it's bubbly, and it's everything that you need.
It's actually really cool, and there's going to be a lot of
interesting,
nerdy wine fun going on there too.
Yeah.
Okay.